How's it going, guys? I'm Matt Torix, and today on my journey to play every single game ever released in the Elder Scrolls franchise and rank them all in one big tier list at the very end, we move on to the fourth game released in the timeline and the second ever Elder Scrolls spin-off game, The Elder Scrolls Adventures Redguard, a game that at its time was considered so much of a flop that it actually sent Bethesda into a financial spiral shortly after its release. But what exactly about this game caused it to fail so badly? Well, in this video, I plan to figure that out, as I play this game for the first time and document my time spent on the island of Stros Makai, as well as giving any opinions or observations I may have along the way. So come with me as I play The Elder Scrolls Adventures Redguard for the very first time. But before we get started, we need to understand what exactly this game is, how it came to be, and why it was deemed so unsuccessful. The Elder Scrolls Redguard was one of 3 different projects being developed by Bethesda at the same time in the late 90s, alongside an Elder Scrolls Legend Battlespire, which I covered on the channel not too long ago, and the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. Redfall was the second of these projects to be released, coming out in November of 1998. The game is probably one of the most experimental entries that has ever been made in the series, since instead of being a medieval fantasy role-playing game like Daggerfall or Skyrim, Redfall is a third-person action-adventure game themed around pirates and medieval Persian influence, filled with swashbuckling buccaneers, deadly traps, and hidden treasures. The game took heavy inspiration from treasure hunter-themed games at the time, like Tomb Raider and Prince of Persia, which really makes this game stick out when compared to all of the other entries in the Elder Scrolls. But unfortunately, this distinction doesn't really work out like the developers were intending. Most of the time actually works against it. I like to think of this game like the Fallout Brotherhood of Steel of its franchise. Both of these games were massive changes to their series formula that were created in an attempt to expand upon the franchise and bring it to an all-new audience. But like Brotherhood of Steel, none of the features in Redguard feel implemented correctly. And it's so damn wildly different that it feels like a random game with the Elder Scrolls tacked onto it just to make some extra money. But in order to actually learn more about this game for myself, it's time to boot up a brand new file and get started. Now, the first thing I will admit, the lore for this game does go pretty hard. The opening cutscene of Redguard sets up the Tiber War, a war between the Empire of Tiber Septim and the Crown of Hammerfell. The death of Hammerfell's king had sparked a civil war between 2 of its major political groups, the Crowns and the Forebears. The Crowns were led by the king's son, Prince Ator, who was trying to unite the 2 sides against the Imperial forces. The Empire chose to side with the Forebears and pushed the Crowns back to the small island of Stros Makai, where the prince was killed and an Empire leader named Rickton took his place. Our protagonist, Cyrus, is a mercenary in search of our sister, who has gone missing on our home island of Stros Makai. So we must sail our way to the island and uncover the secrets of our sister's disappearance. So as brought up in the intro, we play as a Redguard mercenary named Cyrus, making this the first and only time in this series where character customization was completely thrown out the window. Which, just like Brotherhood of Steel, it's just such a weird fucking decision to see in a series that from the beginning had character customization and builds as a central part of its core gameplay. But I will admit that Cyrus is a charming enough main character given the setting of Redguard, and you can tell during certain dialogue options that they were really trying to go for that Indiana Jones treasure hunter badass type of protagonist, which has varying levels of success. But since, as mentioned, there's no character customization this time around, so we're put straight into the game without too much of a warning. Basically, Cyrus and a small crew of shipmates have taken their ship to the island of Stros Makai, but it turns out that the other members of the ship were a bunch of pussies and planned to betray me, sending us into our very first combat section. Now, if you've been keeping up with some of the other entries in this series, you'd know that for some reason, all of the default control schemes on these older Elder Scrolls titles are some of the most abhorrent pieces of shit that I have ever had the displeasure of experiencing. And I'm happy to report that Redguard has the exact same problem with a brand new twist. Since this game is in the third person as opposed to the regular first person Elder Scrolls games, I now have to worry about fighting the camera at every step of the way. The Elder Scrolls Redguard has a set camera that automatically adjusts itself based on player movement and rotation, which isn't uncommon, as most third-person games have the exact same system. But what makes Redguard's camera frustrating is that there's no way to smoothly turn left or right to help reposition your character. The only thing you can do are these extremely slow and choppy shuffles by pressing the left or right keys. Now some of you might be asking, then what does the mouse do? The answer? Literally nothing. All of this game is built using keyboard input, and there's no way to take advantage of a mouse or cursor to navigate through menus, select items, or rotate your character. The only real thing you can do with the mouse is map the left and right clicks as any of the game's controls that you feel like. God, it's moments like this that make me really wish I was on Morrowind already. But anyway, back to the matter at hand. We get ambushed by our shipmates and have to actively Goomba stomp them in order to take back control of our ship. Once that's taken care of, we pull into the harbor of Stros Mackay and truly start our journey. Now with no real indicator of where exactly to go, I decided to walk around the town and see if anyone had any information on the disappearance of my sister. The first place I tried to look was the palace of Lord Rickton himself, the current ruling figure of Stros Mackay. But without any good reason to see the Lord, I was denied any sort of entry into the palace. So next I headed towards the #1 starting quest location in any Elder Scrolls title, the town tavern. And lo and behold, waiting for me at the tavern was a Nord by the name of Tobias, the very man who apparently sent Cyrus the letter that warned him of his sister's disappearance. Through talking to Tobias, we get to know a bit more about this island and those who inhabit it, as Tobias lore dumps with every voice line that comes out of his mouth. But one of the more important things that he brings up is one of the local merchants, who usually has odd jobs for those willing to pick them up. By going to him, he gives me a job to travel to a necromancer's tower and retrieve some sort of ancient gem, then deliver said gem to Rickton himself. Now since we were trying to get an audience with Rickton already, this was perfect. I didn't know the exact direction to get to the wizard's castle, but I figured that if I just picked a path and kept running along it, eventually I would find something of interest. So I picked a random path on the outside of town and just ran across it for a while, until eventually the path led to a series of bridges that stretched out across the sea. When you ran over certain parts of these bridges, boards would fall and force you to make jumps to continue. Pretty standard stuff. But when you combine precise jumps with a movement system that doesn't know what the word precise means, even the simplest of jumps can have you mauled by a shark or burnt to a crisp. Now I'm not going to exaggerate and say that this was a hard parkour section, just that the controls were making it take a bit longer than it should have. Luckily for me, at the end of these bridges there was a weird skeleton boatman type creature, which when I paid him some gold, he took me to a dark and mysterious island with a tall tower at the very end of it. The exact tower that I needed to be at in order to retrieve the gem. Now I didn't plan this at all. It just so happened that the exact path I decided to wander to was the one that led me to my main objective. And after making my way through an army of these random undead warriors, I was right outside the gate of the stereotypical-ass wizard's tower. Then the wizard Nagasta emerged from his dwelling while looking like the hash-slinging slasher. He lets me know that he's been expecting me, then hands me the artifact as promised. Now that I had the gem in my possession, it was time for me to make my journey back to the main island of Stros Mackay, which meant retracing my steps to the boatman, going back across the bridges, and following the path back to the village. Now everything was going great, right up until I missed this jump right here, and tried to reload my save back to before the jump. Even though my intention was to press the load button, I accidentally pressed save, meaning that my one and only save file for this playthrough now had me stuck in the middle of the ocean and surrounded by sharks. If I stayed in the ocean for too long, I would automatically be pulled under by some sort of kraken, so I ended up dying quite a few times just trying to plan out a route back to the mainland. In the distance, I could see a bigger landmass than the small rocks and bridges in my immediate vicinity. I figured that this was the mainland, so I began charting out a course in order to reach the shore safely. There were plenty of sharks along the path that would zone in on my position if alerted, so precision and timing was key. There was a small rock about halfway through, which helped me on one lucky attempt to successfully get to the shore and continue my mission. I walked up to the door of the palace, and this time, instead of being turned away by the guards, I was allowed to proceed through the gates. Now that I had an audience with Queso, it was time for me to ask him about my sister. But since I wasn't giving this fat fuck his precious gem until he told me some info about her, it made him mad enough to send his personal guard after me. I disposed of them pretty easily, but unlucky for me, Rickton had a twink dark elf who was more than ready to tranquilize me as soon as I finished killing the guards. When I awoke from being drugged, Cyrus had been carried away and thrown into the catacombs, an ancient prison that none can escape from. But what Richten and those shitfucks didn't know is that I am built different. So after some wandering around aimlessly and killing various soldiers, I stumbled upon a puzzle room with 3 doors. By pressing the buttons on the floor in different combinations, it would open up one of the 3 doors. In each of these 3 doors, there was a parkour section with an elite guard and a strange rune object at the very end. Once I collected all 3 of these runes, I could take them to a puzzle in another part of the catacombs and solve them. The puzzle was a little confusing, but basically on this wall, there were a whole bunch of cryptic looking symbols, and the runes I had collected each had one of the symbols on them. So I had to find an orange symbol and check if all 3 of the rune symbols were in that same column. If they were, I had to turn this dial here to the orange symbol, then put the 3 runes in the correct order from top to bottom. When everything was correct, I could pull a lever, unlock a door, and run through a couple more areas to reach the exit. Once I finally made my escape, I got a cutscene between Richten and his elf advisor, to where they hinted that they might know more of our sister's disappearance than they were letting on. But since I've been playing this game for far too long, I think it's time I end it here and move things on to my final thoughts. So if I'm being honest, this game is just not that good. I often see this game lumped together with Battlespire for the worst games in the series. But with Battlespire, I honestly think its simplicity helped it to not be as intolerable. But this game's clunky controls, plus its completely different style from anything else in the series, causes it not to catch my attention like some other titles in the series do. I think that this game has some good ideas, like some new lore, a different style of fantasy, and an alright story, but I think it's the execution of this game that makes it really fall flat. At the beginning of this video, I compared it to Fallout Brotherhood of Steel, and I stand by that comparison. Both of those games just kinda make me wonder what the hell I was playing and why they existed. But anyways, that's about it for this video. If you liked it and want to see me cover other titles in the Elder Scrolls series, be sure to subscribe to the channel and comment down below. This video should either be out on or shortly before the 25th, so I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas and a very Happy New Year. If you got to this point in the video, I thank you so much for watching and hope to see you in the next one. Peace.